Welcome, Soundies, to our Sound for Video session. Today is the 15th of May, 2022. It's good to have you all here, and thanks for joining today. We have a variety of things I want to talk about today. We have some good questions that were submitted ahead of time. Of course, we will go to the chat at the end here, but let me jump over to the... I'm operating solo today, just FYI, but we're going to do our best here. First up, talk about today's signal chain. Not everyone, people often ask, okay, can you please tell us what you're using? So we're just to establish that because we are audio nerds here. And if you're here, you might be an audio nerd too. I don't know if anyone's ever told you that. I just thought you should know just in case. But today we're using the Earthworks Ethos microphone. That's it, just down at the bottom of the frame here. You can see just the top of the foam. And then that is going into the Shelford channel from Rupert Neve Design. That is routed line output, line output into the Canon C200 camera, which is the camera we're using here today for my main shot. And then that combines the audio and the video and sends it over to the A10 Mini, which is what we're using here today, A10 Mini Extreme. And then that sends, I guess I haven't always shared the detail here, but this actually has HDMI out into a decimator that converts it to SDI, and that runs it out into the other room where we have our Epiphan Pearl Nano, which is actually streaming it to YouTube. So one piece of information I had failed to share in previous signal chain reviews. So that's what we're doing today. I'm using the mixer for the A10 Mini, so I have a variety of different sources. There's the audio here, of course, that you're hearing from the camera. We also, the music that was played beforehand is played on the Mac here, which is one of the sources into the A10 Mini. That will also be playing back a video a little bit later on that we're going to show. And then we have a HyperDeck as well, though we're not going to use the HyperDeck audio today. So I'm going to go ahead and turn that off. And I can actually show you here. This is the mixer that we're using. So you can see my audio right now coming in here on channel number 1. It says C70. Technically, we actually hooked up the C200 for today. Pretty much the same difference, though. And then here's the audio coming in from the Mac. We pulled that down a little bit. The audio, most commercial music is mastered really, really loud. So usually I pull that down a little bit just to keep it from getting too crazy there. And we also were going to play something back on the deck. I had to make a last-minute change there. The HyperDeck was having trouble. These HyperDecks, I do like Blackmagic gear, but it is not perfect, and I have struggled mightily with this HyperDeck. I'm getting distracted. Let's go back to the Superstores. We could talk about that later if you're all interested in that. But all right, so that's our signal chain. I just wanted to follow up. We do have the second installment of the Dialogue Edit Mix Master Challenge coming up. We have set a date, June 2nd. That's actually a Thursday. It'll be Thursday evening U.S. time. We don't have the exact time set yet. We're trying to get all of the panelists organized and coordinated in terms of schedules. So we have some people on the West Coast of the United States and on the East Coast and in between as well. So we're working all of that out. But we'll have more details as we get closer. But just wanted to let you know that's going to be June 2nd, probably somewhere around, Eastern time, maybe 9 or 10 p.m. Eastern time, Eastern U.S. time. So just so you can start to kind of schedule that out if you are interested in coming back. We had 4 people who submitted different mixes, and we're going to have the panel review those. So that's what we'll be talking about there. All right. Let's see here. Today, we're going to talk a little bit about XLR audio cables. This is an incredibly exciting topic, although you might have thought, oh, well, that's kind of a boring topic at first, but we're going to make this as exciting as possible. Audio cables actually do make a difference, and one of the questions I have received a whole bunch of times is, why do some cables cost, like a 25-foot microphone cable, in some cases cost $60 and US, and another one costs $15 US? Does the $60 one really sound that much better? And so that's an interesting question, and we will talk about that a little bit. Once we're done with our discussion about XLR audio cables, we'll come back, cover the questions that were submitted ahead of time, and then we'll go to the chat as well and see what questions we've got there. Let me just take a quick look at the chat here. And we have a few questions. We will come back to Oh No Coffee. I see yours here. Definitely we'll come back to that. And it looks like Christopher already answered it to some extent. We can go into more detail. But we do have plenty of things that we'll come back and cover in the chat here. So let me just jump in first up to our discussion of audio cables. And let me just switch on over directly to that. So that's going to be here. Okay. XLR audio cables. They're actually two different types of cables, or you can think of they're actually the same cable used in different ways. One's as a microphone cable and the other as a patch cable. What's the difference between these two? Of course, a microphone connects a microphone usually to a preamplifier. So that's going to be a recorder, a mixer, or something along those lines. And then a patch cable is used to interconnect various audio pieces of gear. So, for example, you might send an output of your mixer over into a live stream switcher. That would be a patch. In that use case, it would be a patch cable that you'd be using. You'd call it a patch cable in that case. In reality, they are actually very much the same thing. In fact, I'll show you here. So we have a couple of XLR cables here. Let me just move one of them out of the way. We'll come back to this one in a minute. All right, on this we have two different ends. We have the male end, which is over here in my right hand. That's this one right here, called male for pretty obvious reasons. And then this is the female end over here, also for pretty obvious reasons. One of the kind of fundamentals that a lot of people don't realize that you should know is that the male end is always sending audio out of it. The female end is always receiving audio into it. So for example, if I was using this as a microphone cable, the microphone would connect to the female end because the female end is going to receive the audio from the microphone. And then the male end would plug into the preamplifier, recorder, mixer, whatever you're plugging into, and send the audio out the male end into that mixer or recorder. So that is the first thing to know about these cables. So it's the same cable, whether you're using it as a microphone cable or a patch cable in this case when we're talking about XLR cables. So one end will always be female, the other end will always be male in those cases. Okay, something really important to understand is that when you are troubleshooting, and that's the main reason we're talking about cables here, is that they are what interconnect our microphones and our mixers and our recorders and our other audio gear. They are really usually the weakest link in your audio signal chain. That's just the reality. And the reason for that is many. The cables are very flexible. They get abused, whether intentionally or not. They do get, they take a lot of battering here and there, especially if people are walking on them. I would highly recommend also, by the way, that you not put them in a place where people are going to be stepping on them if you can avoid it. That's not always possible, but whenever it is possible, you should avoid that. They get twisted, they get pulled, they get yanked, they get all sorts of abuse. So they generally do tend to be the weakest link in the signal chain. When you do experience any sort of hum or other interference, 9 times out of 10, in my experience, it's coming from one of your cables. The interference is coming into the signal chain at your cable. Not always, but that's often the case. And so if someone, when people ask me, hey, I'm having some trouble, I'm picking up some hum, what should I do? First thing I would always recommend checking is your cables. Try moving your cable to a different place. Try using a different cable. In so many cases, it's the cable. And the reality is also that cables fail. So I have been doing recording since the early 2000s, and so 15, 20 years now, and I've had multiple cables fail. I've had at least 3 cables fail on me, and in fact one of them was when I was on a production sound job. So what I would recommend is, if you are in that situation, or if you're going to be doing any sort of work for pay, highly recommend you bring a backup or multiple backups of cables. So really important to be prepared there in those circumstances. Even balanced XLR cables can pick up interference. Excuse me. I just wanted to underscore that. The really nice thing about XLR cables is that they are balanced, and that gives you some immunity to interference. It also allows you to run the cable longer distances. That's the huge advantage. But they are capable of picking up interference still, so there are still some considerations, and I think we'll illustrate that here in just a minute. But just one thing to keep in mind is that they're not perfectly immune. They're better than unbalanced cables, but they're not going to save you in every circumstance, and we'll kind of illustrate that here in just a moment. First, I would also recommend you always route your cables clear of electromagnetic fields or electromagnetic interference of any sort. So that's going to be anything where there's current flowing through a cable. That's going to be power strips. It's going to be outlets for AC mains. It's going to be power adapters. Anything that's adapting AC to DC in particular tends to be very, very noisy in terms of electromagnetic interference. So those are some things. Let me just give you a quick illustration here of what I'm talking about. Let's talk a little bit about microphone cables. Now we have a disaster setup here, but I want to illustrate something really quickly. Here I'm using a low-cost cable. I believe this one's from Monoprice. Let's go ahead and show you what happens when I put this here with some various sources of electromagnetic interference. Here are some power adapters, a power strip, and we have current flowing through these power cables right here. Both of these are lights. This is a MacBook, and this is another light. Okay, I think you get the idea there. It looked to me in that particular sample that the MacBook's power adapter was probably the noisiest. Obviously, when you sandwich a cable between AC adapters, that's going to be probably the worst possible situation. The reason I bring this up is that this is actually very much a real-world issue that you need to consider. It's not just, I mean, the Monoprice cable will pick up plenty of that. Other cables can as well. So even the higher quality cables, you still want to be careful about routing them between AC adapters or near AC adapters or anything, again, where there's especially a lot of current flowing through an electrical run of some sort. So just one thing to keep in mind there. I would also suggest that when you do, and it's not always possible to avoid power cables and audio cables crossing at some point, but when you do, I would do it at a 90-degree angle. You just want to minimize the amount of contact that the audio cable has with the flowing current and the electromagnetic field. So some things to consider there. If you do have to run them parallel, power and audio, I would keep as much distance between them as you reasonably can. Usually 8-10 inches. What is that in centimeters? 20 centimeters is usually sufficient in most cases, I found, but definitely keep that in mind and be cognizant of keeping those separate. All right. Wrap your cables with the over-under technique. The reason this is important, and we'll come back to what that is and how to do it in just a second here, and I'm actually not going to teach you how to do that today. There's a much better video where you can do that, learn about that from our friend Alan Williams, which I have in a link down below. But wrapping the cable over-under makes it so that you're not constantly putting stress on those copper strands within the cable. So it keeps you from running, it prevents, or at least extends the life of your cable and prevents the copper strands from getting twisted and compromised and eventually breaking. So it also prevents all the twisting and the ugliness that happens. You should be able to take your XLR cable, unwrap the whatever fastener you have on it, and be able to hold on to one end, throw the other end, and it should be able to go out without any sort of tangles, twists, or any of that kind of thing. Your cables should lie flat if you're taking good care of them. And so I would definitely recommend you take a look at Alan's video down below in the description at your convenience. And he is a master cable wrapper, I would say. He's able to wrap that thing so fast. I'm not quite as fast, but I do take care of those cables. And as a result, I've found that my cables have lasted a long time. Again, over the course of the 15 years when I've been using XLR cables, 15, 20 years-ish, I think I know I've had 2 for sure fail, and I think I had a third one fail as well. So if memory serves, but I've got a lot of cables, and all of the rest of them have been holding up very nicely. Incidentally, I've never had none of my Mogamis or Canaries have failed yet. It's always been the others that have failed. So I had a Proco cable, which was, I don't remember what the cabling was. It did have nitric connectors, but it failed. I had one of the Monoprice cables failed. And there was another one, I think it was it was branded Livewire. I don't remember who made the cabling, but it was one that I bought at a Guitar Center when I was kind of in a pinch one time. And it was probably a $15 cable, so it failed as well. So I also, I don't know if he's here today. My friend Kevin, the basic filmmaker, he once contacted me. I hope, Kevin, you don't mind me sharing this story. He has a live stream setup, so he's got a desk, of course, with computers and cameras and all sorts of stuff, and of course, with his microphone on an arm at the desk, and he wanted to run obviously you'd run the cable behind the desk and up to his mix pre over on the other side, and he came to me, and at one point he said, "Curtis, I'm getting this hum, and I cannot figure it out. I've spent all this money on a mix pre. I've got this great microphone. What's going on?" And we did a little bit of troubleshooting. We dug into things. It turns out he was using Amazon Basics cables, and he had them, of course, routed down behind his desk with a bunch of AC adapters. And so once we actually just switched him to some higher quality cables. I think he ended up with some Mogamis. And I don't know if he's routing them still near the AC adapters. I did suggest that you move away from the AC adapters as well, but once he got those new cables and reset everything up, he had no problems. So definitely something to keep in mind. As I mentioned before, always bring backup cables. So when you're doing paid work, or you're doing something where you aren't necessarily going to have an opportunity to do another take, always have a backup on hand and bring it with you. Also, keep them clean. Cables get abused, like I said. I prefer not to, if I'm going to be in a venue or something, maybe doing some live sound or recording a live event, sometimes you do need to tape your cables down. Obviously, the ideal way to do this is to have a channel, like a cable channel, so that nobody's putting pressure on the cables, and you can run the channel and run the cables inside the channel. But if you don't have that and you do have to tape them down with gaff tape, for example, first of all, don't use duct tape. The adhesive on that will just leave an absolute disaster on your cables. Use gaff tape, and even with gaff tape, you'll still get some adhesive on the cables. So what I typically do, let's go to our overhead cam here, is I clean them up. If you do have any sort of adhesive Unisolve, which you can get from Amazon, it's actually an adhesive remover. They're adhesive remover wipes. They're actually made for skin. So for example, if you had a Band-Aid or another bandage on your hand or on your skin somewhere, you can use this to remove this. I also use this to clean up my lavalier microphones after I've hidden them. That will clean those up pretty nicely. Otherwise, if you're just cleaning off a bunch of dirt, just at least get a cloth that you can dampen a little bit and run the cable through it, especially keep the connectors clean. You can run into problems. And you definitely don't want to have dirt in your connector and then put that into your microphones or put that into your mixer or recorder. You definitely want to clean those up. So get in the habit of cleaning your cables and keeping them nice and avoiding any sort of well, I should also say you want to avoid yanking on them as well, especially if you have to run them on the floor. I tend to put strain relief on them, so I'll put a piece of gaff tape at the end first, make sure I have enough slack to get it up to the recorder or the mixer at the very least, and so I use that gaff tape as a strain relief. so you don't want anything yanking on it. Just some general kind of things to keep in mind. Take care of your cables, in short. Don't abuse them. Don't walk on them if you can avoid it. In terms of XLR connectors, I would recommend you get a cable, and there are tons. I mean, here's the thing: is that there are a number of manufacturers that make cables, especially in the high quality cable lines. There are two that I recommend. We'll come to those in just a second. But in terms of connectors, Neutrik is probably your best bet in most cases if you can. I would recommend it. And in fact, what's interesting, if we go back to the overhead camera here for a moment, I don't know if you can see it. It's really small on here. This is a Mix Pre 3. They use Neutrik ports on here. Incidentally, the Zoom F8N right here, also using Neutrik, in this case, combination XLR TRS input jacks there. Don't know if you can see that, but that is something you'll see there. What's interesting is that when you get down to the lower cost mixer recorders, in this case a recorder, the Zoom F3, they are not using Neutrik, or at least it's not branded Neutrik, which probably means it's not Neutrik. And certainly in all of the Zoom H series recorders, you're generally not going to find Neutrik connectors. Now, not necessarily a problem, but I would, if you have the choice, especially if you're cables, I would go with Neutrik. Why? Number one, they have been making these connectors for decades, and they are the type of company that puts a good bit of engineering into their products. So that's one thing that they basically earned my respect and my trust because of that. And I think a lot of other engineers feel that same way. Another thing that's really important too is that I remember when years ago, I did a review of the Tascam DR60D Mark II, one of my first XLR input-based recorders. And I had a great experience with that recorder. I mean, it was great for me I learned a lot with it. But after I did my review, I got a lot of comments from people saying, I don't like this recorder. My cable got stuck in it. I can't get it out. And invariably, when I did a little survey and asked what kind of cable they were using, what kind of connector it had on it, it was not a Neutrik connector that got stuck in the recorder. So what I found is that these off-brand connectors, in many cases, are too tight or too loose, and they can get stuck in the ports that you plug them into or into your microphone, and you really don't want that headache. To me, it's worth the additional expense of getting the Neutrik connectors. Now, there are also, and I'm going to just pull a little something up here on the computer. Let's go to the Mac here. So if you go over to Neutrik, they have a whole bunch of different series of XLR connectors. There's a ton, and you might ask yourself, well, what's the difference between all of these? And in fact, I had someone ask recently, what about the EMC series? What's so special about the EMC series, and should I care, and is it worth it? The EMC series, and just as from their own marketing copy says, EMC XLR series is a specifically designed version of the XX series to give enhanced RF screening for critical applications in live performance and recording where there are particular problems with radio transmission or mobile phones. So you can come in here and read all the descriptions of the different lines. This is kind of the standard one that you'll see almost everywhere, the XX series. So just so you're aware of that. The top series is one of their newer ones. This actually has an IP, 68 rating, I think it is. I don't remember the details, but I think you need to have the right connectors on both sides. In any case, if you're interested in the details, I would recommend either an XX series or an EMC series. If you want a right angle, there's an RX series as well. But generally, I've had very, very good luck with the Neutrik connectors, and so would recommend it if you can. It's worth the extra money from my point of view. All right, next is terms of cables. The two kind of high-quality manufacturers of audio cables are Mogami, in my experience, and Canare, or Canary. I'm not sure how you say that. It's interesting. You can go to their sites as well. They have a variety of different lines of cables. So Mogami's got Platinum, Gold, Silver, Core Plus, so on and so forth. If you come over to the Canary site, they've got their Star Quad microphones and a variety of different series there. The braided shield, aluminum foil shield. They each have different characteristics, and then you can read the whole Canary Star Quad story. So they give you all the details on why these cables are so special from their point of view. And in fact, I've found, again, that they've been really, really good. Let me grab my cable here. Alan Williams actually made a special cable for me. If he were in that business, I would recommend you go to him, but I don't think he is in that business normally. Oh, wait, let me switch back to, this is the challenge of streaming by yourself. Let me switch to this overhead. This is a cable that was made by my friend Alan. You can see we have the Neutrik EMC connectors here. He actually also put a ferrite core on here as well on the male end, so it filters before it sends the audio out. And this is the Canare Star Quad cabling here as well. So this has been a fantastic set of cables. And these, I find the EMF and RF rejection characteristics of this type of cable actually quite good. So I've got a bunch of these. I've got a bunch of stuff in this room. It's not a very big room, and we've got, power and audio cables are all kind of crossing each other in various places underneath and behind the desk. So these have held up really, really nicely for me. So definitely something to consider there. Okay, I think, let's see here. I think that's everything we had. Let's go take a look at the chat here. If you give me just a second, I want to take a quick look here and see what we've got going in today's chat. Okay, looks like Booth Junkie's here. He says, same thing, Alan is great at cables. Yes, if only he were really in that business. I had mentioned Proco cables earlier. Vincent says, basically a cheapy, mostly likely Chinese cable that tie your trunk down, but not to tie your trunk down, but not to count a gig on. Yeah, I would not buy another one of those if I can do it. And then our friend Audio Buff, yes, over under, absolutely. All right, let's see here. The chat, come on, chat. Got this tiny little screen down here. Christopher asks, a good question. Does SoundSpeed's wrangling a cable backup for storage count as abuse? Wrangling a cable backup for storage count as abuse? And the answer is maybe. He can do it so fast, it's amazing that the XLR connector on the other end is flying all over the place as anyway, he's got a great technique. Definitely worth watching the video again down in the description. But yeah, take it easy. Try not again to abuse them. Robert says Canare cables are very supple and malleable, easy to coil. Also, I agree. They do tend to lie very nice and flat. There is something about the feel of the Canare cable is more pleasurable. It is very definitely supple and malleable by all means. Oh, thanks, Vincent, for the super chat. Appreciate that. Okay, there was a question here earlier from Ono Coffee. I want to just address that. Why do you use the Epiphan hardware encoder? So the reason for that, and this is a little detour, trust me, we'll come back, is that I did have problems with the whole long story with the A10 Minis. It was the A10 Mini Pro that had this issue, the Pro ISO, the Extreme ISO as well, all have this problem where, for reasons I cannot explain, I can stream perfectly from the Epiphan Pearl Nano software encoders on my computer, so Ecamm Live, OBS, all of those work fine through the exact same router, my internet service provider, to YouTube, no problem. As soon as I try to do it with any of those three A10 Minis, it will stream for about 30 seconds, and then basically the encoder will freeze up. So not very many, I haven't seen other people report that issue, but that was the experience I've had, and so I just can't trust them anymore. I want these experiences to be as smooth for all of you as possible, so I just don't trust them. I actually sent the A10 Mini Extreme, the A10, whatever this thing is called, A10 Mini Extreme ISO, Back to Blackmagic, I talked with our customer support. They were very, they're very much willing to do it. I had to pay for the shipping back to California. They took a look at it and they said it all checks out. It all looks fine. Everything is working. As soon as I got it back, I tested it again. Same thing. I could stream for about 30 seconds, maybe 60 seconds, and then it would start to freeze up again. So I used to use it, but for whatever reason, it's not working now. If I had to guess, there's something particular that encoder is doing. And this doesn't make any sense, but there's something that encoder is doing that's somewhere in between here and YouTube. It gets tripped up. It gets filtered. It gets something. But for whatever reason, it just doesn't work. So sad but true. I'm not saying that it won't work for you because, again, I haven't heard of anyone else complaining of that issue, but that was my experience there. I like the demo of the electromagnetic field interference already. Win for mono price. It was practically an electromagnetic, absolutely. And that's exactly what happened there. I would also say here, Vincent brings up a good point. Yep, bad soldering is just that I'm an aerospace certified and military spec signed off, and soldering cannot be poured anytime. So that is often where the cables will fail, is that solder point between the connector and the cable itself. There is also, of course, actually we can show this. Grab this cable again and come back to our overhead camera. I can actually disconnect or untwist this. This one's on nice and tightly. There we go. There is also a strain relief bit in here. So here is the metal barrel. Here's this sleeve right here, and there's a strain relief as well. And this gets pinched inside of here when you tighten it up, so that pulling on the cable shouldn't stress the solder joints, but sometimes it does. I mean, you just have to be really careful again. But here's just an example of the soldering, so you can see the 3 pins. So that is often where it fails, is right inside of there. And then we'll get this back in place here. Bring the sleeve back up, bring the barrel. This fits in a particular way, just like that, and then we can tighten that back up. So if you are going to, or if you already know how, or you're going to learn how to solder, there are lots of tutorials online on how to do that for your XLR cables. So a little bit of info there for you. Okay. All right, let's see what else we got here. Oh, someone said something about virtual dog fences. They're great fun when you're recording, according to Herschel. So yeah, be careful of those as well. All right, here is a question. What's the correct way to connect Sennheiser EWD wireless system to an RME UCX2 audio interface? I'm currently using balanced XLR to XLR cable to connect output from the EWD to mic input. Is that question continued? It looks like it got cut off there. I don't know, Herschel, if there was more to it or not. But yeah, that's exactly right. So yeah, just come in balanced if you've got that option with the EWDs. So you're doing it just right. Okay. Ted says, thanks for suggestions on trusted brands. I agree. Nick is making reference to the Cud Judd live stream. If you didn't hear, Bandrew has a podcast. Alan Williams accidentally sent in a typo of a question that said Cud Judd instead of Curtis Judd. It's evidently become a meme now. Danny is deeply offended by that, I will say. For me, it makes me laugh, but that's the background story on that. Another thing here from Graham, cable fidelity, use a cable tester. Absolutely. I have a Q box, which I use. I also have, there's some others I can grab one of those actually if you have just a second here. couple of examples here. We did talk about this on the interview with Jerry Palumbo. This is one of her favorite tools to use for cable testing. It's called a Q box. You can actually hook up a set of headphones and you get an audio test signal that goes through the cable. Pretty nice little device here. It's actually got a belt clip so you can run around if you're doing a big job. You can run around and test a lot of cables really quickly with the Q box. Here is a DBX cable tester. It can test a variety of different types of cables. So here it can do XLR cables, 1/4 inch, PowerCon, various types of, this looks like a 5-pin XLR, so that would be for DMX. So you've got an input on one side, outputs on the other side. And it just gives you LED lights that we'll show you. In fact, we could probably hook one up right now. I don't know if I've got a battery in this at the moment. I think we do. Again, don't twist your cables. Yeah, so this one will actually show you for each individual cable here. You've got a switch here. So this is just a 3-pin. 1, 2, and 3 all looking good. So that's the idea. So cable testers can be a useful tool as well. All right. Oh, Sonoga asks, what is the recommended max length for XLR cables? I would generally try to keep them under 300 feet if you can. Obviously, yeah, that would be my general rule of thumb. But if you can run them shorter than that, it's all the better. So the shorter the better, but generally, if you can keep under 300 feet. In some installations, they have to sometimes go farther than that. But yeah, that's the general idea there. Here's a thought from Mike. Just a thought, make your own. I have some self-made that have lasted over 40 years. Wow, that is impressive. So, yeah, good stuff. All right. Okay. Well, thanks everybody for that. Let's go ahead and jump into, hey, how come, there we go. This, got that working. Okay, let's go ahead and jump into some questions that were submitted ahead of time. And I'm going to go back over to that right here. Okay. Mike says, oh, this is something that Mike also sent to me. Again, kind of reiterating one thing that we talked about before regarding your discussion about XLR cables. You probably already got this covered, but it's worth stating that some of the cheaper plugs and sockets are an extremely tight or loose fit when mated with those from a different manufacturer. I've experienced both problems in the past. We have a major supplier here in the UK whose, quote, own brand XLR cables are often a very, very tight fit into the XLR sockets on various items of equipment. So yeah, that's a big part of the reason on the for the recommendation on Neutrik is that the Neutriks generally don't seem to have that issue. And if you've got Neutrik inputs on your quality gear, using cables with those Neutrik connectors is a good idea. All right. Let's go on to our next question from Adrian. First question is to do with remote collaborative workflow. So the context here is Adrian is using iZotope RX and says the following: I've not seen any collaboration features within iZotope. Do you know how this could work? Does iZotope have some sort of additional user license that I could then give him access to the software? So the context here in addition is that Adrian has an engineer who's working with him a long ways away and wants to know how they can, it sounds like share a license is the question here. Or would I have to let him access my entire computer via TeamViewer or similar so that he can use the iZotope software on my machine? I'd probably want to have this capability set up anyway, but limit its use. No, you have to have a separate license, Adrian, for each computer that's going to use it, from my understanding. You might contact iZotope and confirm that that's right, but that's my understanding, is that each user has to have their own. Each user that has a separate host needs to use their own. I don't see that working very well over TeamViewer. Maybe I'm wrong, but when you're doing audio mixing, I would, especially cleanup, I don't know that I would trust doing that over something like TeamViewer or any sort of like real-time remote into another computer. Maybe it works well, I don't know, but I haven't done it. but just color me skeptical on that one. I think it'd probably be best off to have a separate license for each person there. All right, the next question from Adrian has to do with microphone placement. I've been using the Tentacle Track E recorder with the stock lavalier mic that comes with the device. I absolutely love the sound quality of the 32-bit float. That's good. Game changer for one-man band. 1 out of 10 times I mess up the mic placement and get horrific clothing rustle. I wish I had seen your video about using the Hush Lav makeup tube sooner. I'm wondering if you've heard of the weird thing about monitoring the Tentacle Track E audio. It seems like the European models allow monitoring the audio while recording, but the US version does not. Any tips on how to monitor these so that I can catch clothing rustle if it's happening? And the answer is yes. Let me just go to our Mac here. A great new feature, Adrian, is in the 2.0.3 firmware update for the Tentacle Track E. You can now monitor audio on the Tentacle Setup app via Bluetooth. So if you get this installed on your Tentacle Track E, you'll be able to use the app on your phone to monitor and be able to hear whether or not you have any issues in terms of clothing rustle or anything else going on. It also incidentally improves write performance and battery running time. So also useful updates to that. So hopefully that's helpful for you. Yes, the whole issue with being able to monitor directly from the unit in non-US versions, but not being able to do it in the US versions, is that they're trying to avoid any sort of patent issues. There is a manufacturer who has a patent that Tentacle is interpreting as you can't monitor on the device itself while recording. So on a body pack, there's a lot of details, but that's the reason why it's there. Now with the Bluetooth app, you should be able to monitor via Bluetooth. So with your phone or tablet connected via Bluetooth to the Track E, just to clarify. So, all right, hopefully that is useful for you. That's everything we had in terms of questions submitted ahead of time. So let's go ahead and take a look at the chat here and see what else we have here. Oh, when Danny sees this, she's going to be deeply offended. Oh my goodness, you are pushing the limits here, my friend. Andrew says casually has 2 cable testers lying around. Yes, well, when you're a nerd, it happens. Greg says something interesting here. I found the Neutrik EMC connectors difficult to solder. Pins are smaller than a normal connector. Use a Shure plug on filter now instead. Ah, interesting. Okay. So you're using the Shure plug-on filter to manage any sort of RF and then just sticking with the Neutrik XX connectors. Interesting. I have a confession to make. I've only soldered a few of my own cables. I typically have someone else do it. In fact, again, if Alan still did it, I would recommend you get Alan's cables. They are fantastic. They've been amazing. But if not, I have some links down below for some cables. I use a local company called Performance Audio. They're here in Salt Lake. They've made a lot of my cables, and they use Mogami Neutrik connectors. You can choose any connector of the Neutrik connectors you want. You can choose Canare. You can choose Mogami. All the different grades of cables. And the prices are reasonable. So I say prices are reasonable. Some people are going to be in shock when they see the prices of these cables, depending on how long of a cable you need. But I would probably look for a local supplier if you can, if you want to get your cables custom made. Yeah, those are some thoughts there. Okay. Here is a great question. Will better quality cables sound better for longer runs? The way I see it is this. I'm glad you brought us back to this question. So I generally don't find one cable to sound better than another as long as neither of them are picking up any interference, generally. So no, I think what I will say with confidence, Steve, is that better cables that are better shielded, that are better constructed, usually will have fewer issues. So they were going to be less likely to pick up interference. They're going to be less likely to pick up RF and EM interference. So that's generally what I found. What I have not found generally is, unless it's a really low quality cable, is that suddenly your microphone is going to sound 10 times better with a higher quality cable. That's generally not the case. Again, unless you're comparing to a really, really poor quality cable. But usually it's more of a, it's not entirely binary, but it's a little bit more binary. And what I mean by that is that what I find is the more expensive cables are going to keep you out of trouble better than the less expensive cables generally. So that's what I mean by that. Linda's finding the conversation useful. Thanks for coming by, Linda. It's great to have you here. And then to answer the question, Christopher said, yes, possibly yes, they have better RF shielding, definitely. Vincent says, I sometimes measure the connector with veneer calipers and the differences are definitely there. So the reason for fit issues, definitely. So that's talking again about the connectors. Vincent mentions it's not, TeamViewer is not your best vehicle when it drops, and Canon does. I use TeamViewer every day and it's far from perfect. Yeah, I'd be really hesitant to do editing and mixing via something like that. All right, question. You seem to be the only on YouTube tested the Trackie with quality lav. How would you compare the noise audio quality against your audio limited wireless with a good lav? The preamp on the Tentacle Trackie is not as good as you're going to find on something else, like an audio limited or a Sound Devices or a Electrosonics or a Wizicom or Zaxcom, or is that what it's called? I just got confused with the 1980s video game. Anyway, yeah, the Tentacle Trackie is a nice little device, nice little product. I rarely use them. Not because they're bad, just because I have higher quality gear that I can use. I found that the preamps were just not that great, and certainly the included lavalier microphone was not great. At least I didn't like it compared to some of the other things I have. So that's my overall sense on that. Andrew submitted a question, but only a couple of hours ago. Long question short, is it better to get a mixer with +4 dBu line-ins for use with pro outboard gear? My Yamaha has -10 dBu line-ins. Usually it's -10 dBV. I apologize, Andrew. I didn't see that. I was getting set up here, so I apologize I didn't get that. But yeah, ideally, yes, I would get a mixer with a +4 dBu line inputs if you can. The -10 dBV, especially if you're doing a lot of interconnects between something else and your mixer, then yeah, I would probably, that would be my take on it. Other people may have a different opinion. Would love to see what other people have to say. Okay, Ono Coffee are curious to know how you typically run your main mic to Allen & Heath mixer to ATEM Mini, and why you choose whichever routing. Yes, in this case, for the live stream, I almost always go microphone, Rupert Neve Designs Shelfer channel, which has a compressor and an EQ on it. Then that goes into the camera's XLR input at line level, and then that goes to the ATEM Mini. So that's typically how I do it. The reason I do that, I will never have a sync issue if I'm running the audio directly into camera like that. So analog, preamp, compressor, EQ is not going to introduce substantial amounts of latency. So that audio is basically appearing at the right time for the video. And then it gets combined with the video in the camera and then goes to the ATEM from there. Now, if I were to run the audio from the Rupert Neve Designs Shelfer channel into the ATEM, I have a couple of problems I'd have to solve. The biggest one is probably the latency of the video. The video would come in much later than the audio would. That's one thing, but also it has a balanced output on the Shelfer channel and an unbalanced input on the ATEM Mini. So I'd also have to overcome that. Both are surmountable problems, but for me, it just makes more sense to go into the camera in this case. So that is typically why I do it. Now, if I am using the Allen & Heath mixer, The Allen and Heath mixer does have a delay feature on it. So what I can do is I can actually dial in the amount of delay I want to put on the mixer. So if I send my audio, my microphone feed into the mixer, and then mixer into the switcher, the ATEM, I can apply that delay on the ATEM or on the Allen Heath itself. So its outputs actually it's a digital mixer, and so it does have a delay there, which is really nice. But I don't do that quite as often. Again, that mixer is probably overkill for this. Usually I'm only running 2 or 3 mics max. So that's something like a 12, I think there are 12 physical inputs on it, but it's a 24 track capable mixer, I think, somewhere in there, some crazy number that I've never even come close to hitting the limit on. So, all right. Just to follow up with Andrew. Thank you, Curtis. Now to learn to read the spec sheets. I'll go take a look at that, Andrew, and see what I can find out. I have seen mistakes in spec sheets before. Minus 10 dBu doesn't sound right to me. Normally it's a minus 10 dBV, but I'll take a look at that when I get a second here, and I'll get back to you on that. Do you have separate cables you use for indoor and outdoor shoots? No, I just keep them clean. Anytime I go outdoors, then they get cleaned right after. So that's my overall strategy there. Peter Locke, Alan might lose a gasket if we all posted videos using a cable winder. Please don't use a cable winder for your XLR audio cables. He might lose a gasket. Regarding cable winders, I have some cables that are 40 plus meters. Most are on winders. I buy empty reels and then wire a connector onto the central hub. No problem. Oh, okay, interesting. Maybe it is okay. I have not used them. I just learned the over-under technique, and I use that. But 40 meters, that's a lot of cable. Tactical armored cables are just as valid indoors as outdoors when people may be stepping on them, etc. So looks like a little conversation there going on. Vincent also says, oh, good grief, come on. You can see why I like to have Danny here usually to manage the chat here. Here's the next one. Linda says, you mentioned an issue with the hyperdeck. What issues should I be aware of? Well, in this case, what I was having a problem with is that I wanted to show that video that we showed earlier of the cable with interference. That was something I filmed, gosh, early 2021 for some of my friends at Webflow. And it was originally filmed, I think, in 23.976 frame rate. On the hyperdeck I have, when I go to, for example, the super source, or actually I can even go to the hyperdeck itself, this little background here is playing back on the hyperdeck right now. It is a 29.976 frames per second looping video. So it just plays it over and over and over again. And what I found was that when I took that 23.976, so the looping video is 29.97, the waves that are in the background. This one. So what I found is that when I had this older video that I filmed last year, it was in 23.976 frame rate. I had to re-export it, which I know is going to be a janky experience or weird experience in 29. Actually, I think I first exported it into 30, put it on the same drive so that I could play it back from the hyperdeck, and it did all sorts of weird things. First of all, it wouldn't recognize it. The hyperdeck just wouldn't even see it. So I re-exported it at 29.97, and then it saw it, but it played it back really, really badly. Really messed up the video. Like I would get half of a frame on one half of the screen and another half of a frame on the other. It was just really messed up, like non-playable. So that's why I ended up playing back from the computer today. So the hyperdecks are just really particular. I think what the hyperdecks are really made for is like recording and then playing back on the same device and not putting a bunch of media from other things. And if you do put media from other things, this is one of the older ones. I think this is the first. It's a rack mount unit. It's I don't remember the exact model, but it is in essence the one that has 6G SDI inputs, and it's I think one of the first ones they made that could play 4K. But it's very, very particular, and it doesn't do frame rate conversion for you. Everything has to be exactly the same. So that's kind of the high level of what was going on with that. Nick mentions running a device with a minus 10 dBV output into a device expecting a plus 4 dBU input causes issues. It can still, quote, work, but it is suboptimal and some devices won't work at all. Okay, let's take a look here and see what else we've got here. Christopher corrected me. Thank you, Christopher. All of the Allen and Heath SQs are 48 channels, so most inputs would be via stage boxes or Dante. I should look up N-Trek Primer Line XLR cable. It's the biggest snake oil, and it has a big box connected to ground that will make the audio better. I'll take a look. N-Trek Primer. I do get a kick sometimes out of, let me go back to my main camera here so it's easier to look at versus all the text that was overlapping. The audiophile world, I have had a chuckle with friends before on the audiophile world and some of the products that are available there. One of my friends was telling me, and he actually pulled it up we actually saw it on a website. You could purchase, and maybe there's just something I don't understand, but you could buy a demagnetizer for your CDs. Which I thought, well, wait a minute. CDs are optical discs. Why would you need a demagnetizer for them? But evidently you could buy a $250 device that will demagnetize all of your CDs and DVDs for you so you can get the very best audio experience possible. And there's lots of other stuff that could potentially be labeled as snake oil as well. What length of XLR cables would you recommend for a home studio? What's the longest you've ever needed? I generally stay to 25-foot cables is usually what I do, or custom. You can get something that's exact for what you need. Again, the less length and extra cable you have, the better. For my monitors, for my near-field monitors, I actually ordered custom cables and got the exact size that I needed. So I don't have a lot of extra cable running around there, and I can just run it directly in. Okay. Mike has a good one here. If I can get my chat to work again. Come on, chat. This chatty chat is giving me grief. Okay, well, it's like it locked up or something. I'm going to take it offline just a second here, see if I can get this fixed. Okay. And I got a question there from Vincent. I don't know the context. I apologize, people. I am having trouble with this, the chat overlay for whatever reason. Well, thank you all today for joining us. I hope that this was a useful discussion for you all. I hope you're having a great weekend. I hope that you have a good week and that you get out there and are able to make some really good recordings or some really great mixes or some really great voiceover performances or whatever it is you do, whatever that may look like in your particular case. And we will talk to you again next week. Take care, everybody. well, actually, before we do that, I do need to cue up the music here. And this particular music is quite a bit louder, so in this case, I'm going to come back to the Mac. I'm going to pull this fader down so that we don't blast your ears. And let me just show you, this is how we're going to fade it out. We're going to go ahead and play. We'll see y'all next week. Take care, everybody.